Hi folks, welcome to the Pretonic Standard Model. The Pretonic Standard Model is going to be the 8th paper of ethereal mechanics. This video is being produced really early to show you the early stuff that we have long before the paper is written. In this introduction video, video number 1, we're going to have an introduction to the Pretonic Standard Model, and then we're going to discuss the binary Pretonic systems, also known as bionic. There's also trionic, quadronic, pentonic, and hexonic systems. We'll have a quick intro to those, but we're going to predominantly cover the bionic systems. So I'm sure you've seen that the quantum mechanics folks have their standard model of elementary particles, and they've arranged them, which almost looks like a periodic table of the elements only for subatomic particles or elementary particles. Now, the interesting thing about all of these particles is that everything that you see here is intrinsic. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if we focus in on this upper level guy here, you see they have a mass. They have the mass of the up quark, and they got the mass is 2 million electron volts per c squared. And the charge is 2/3, and the spin is 1/2. All of these properties are intrinsic. They're inside the particle and inseparable from the particle. And that's where quantum mechanics and ethereal mechanics diverge. All of these things are synthesized within the system, and we're going to show you that because we're going to show you how to derive mass, charge, and spin from the Pretonic models of matter that we used in the electrogravity series. Okay, and so, but if you go back and you even ask them, well, what is mass? And they don't know. And this is a clip from a search of YouTube videos. What the heck is mass? What is mass? What exactly is mass? How is it formed? So for all of the bluster of the standard model, they really have no idea what these intrinsic properties are. I am going to show you what mass is. And this is the difference. When it comes to mass, quantum mechanics don't know. Ethereal mechanics are going to show you it's synthetic. The next property is spin. Again, do a search. What is spin? What is spin? What is quantum spin? And the contradiction is they know it spins, but then if you read this introduction down here for this guy, for the science asylum, small particles like protons, neutrons are often shown to be spinning on an axis like a planet. But this simply cannot be the case. In other words, it has spin, but it can't be spin. Quantum mechanical spin is actually an intrinsic property like charge. So how does that work? Again, we're going to show you that spin is for real. It's not intrinsic. But because they treat all of these particles as these little boilerplates that you can't get into, they don't have a model below that. They have to treat all these things very esoterically. So again, what is spin? They really don't know. Okay, we're ethereal mechanics. I'm going to show you that the second order system of pretons, which is the model of matter, actually do spin, and the spin is actually responsible for the synthesis of most of the other properties. And if you want to look at the electrogravity series, we show you how magnetism, the Coulomb effect, and inertia are all part of the spin. Finally, what is electric charge? What is electric charge? What is electric charge? What if charge is not fundamental? Again, for all the bluster of this standard model, they really have no understanding of what they're doing. Because again, charge to them is intrinsic and they really don't know what it is. And I'm going to show you that charge is a synthetic emission from a more fundamental field called the Pretonic field. Well, actually, we showed this in the electrogravity series. We're just going to touch on it here. We're not going to do a derivation. So again, for all the bluster of this theory of everything, which actually explains nothing like this. This is from Quantum Magazine. The most successful scientific theory ever, the standard model, the theory of everything. The theory of everything that explains nothing. This is the most ridiculous nonsense. The bluster around this physics model is totally ridiculous, and you're just going to see more ridiculosity as we go forward. So again, quantum mechanics, no model of matter, no model of gravity, no model of inertia. I'm going to go on and on and on and on. And you have ethereal mechanics, has a model of matter, unifies all the fields including gravity and inertia. Okay, so why are we wasting time with this quantum mechanics? I don't know. I get all the right answers. Okay, so let me show you the ethereal thinking that went into what the fundamental components of matter should be. And this is a thing I've had out for many, many, many years. You can go back to my old videos and you'd see this as the epochs of science. So basically, out in the universe, you have virtually unlimited number of chemical compounds, virtually infinite. The ways you could put together hydrogen and oxygen and helium, or helium doesn't really bind with anything but itself. But anyway, so you have virtually unlimited. And then from all of these chemical compounds are synthesized by 100 or so stable chemical elements. Now, there could also be unstable chemical elements too that aren't shown here. That is well known. You get stable and unstable chemical elements. Okay. Now, from these 100 or so stable chemical elements, these are all synthesized by 3 subatomic particles: the proton, the neutron, and the electron. And again, I'm going to show you that there are components to these that are unstable as well. There are unstable products that are produced. The same things that produce protons, neutrons, and electrons also can produce unstable subatomic particles. Now, physicists have misidentified these unstable particles as components of protons, neutrons, and electrons. I can show you that's clearly not the case. So if we keep on going down, okay, infinite is synthesized by 100 or so. 100 or so is synthesized by 3. So therefore, if the numbers keep getting smaller, the only answer is that these can only be synthesized by 2. I don't know why that was. So there were 2. We have our positive and negative Preton. The positive Preton is shown by orange or yellow or something in that matter, and the negative Preton is shown as a purple-ish circle. And they have unsymmetrical charge. Okay, the positive Preton is plus 1/3, the negative Preton is minus 1/2. From these 2 particles, I can synthesize everything that the quantum grease monkeys see, including what I call the debris particles, or the unstable subatomic components. Okay, so what is mass? Well, if you followed the electrogravity series, we define mass, but we're going to show it again. So what I developed over 20 years is a new model of induction called new induction, and it looks remarkably like F equals ma, inertial force. Now, for those people who don't know, the blue means legacy units. Okay, I do everything now in natural units, okay, to get rid of all this blue gunk, which actually obscures things. But for the sake of the people that aren't familiar with the natural units, I'm going to continue to use legacy units, and everything that is in blue is a legacy construct. Okay, and so here we have force, looks like mass times acceleration. And therefore, if we pull this out as mass, mass is equal to this. And if you do substitute, you do get kilograms in here. And actually what it turns out is this constant here is just a converter from the natural units of inertia to the kilogram, because this km just is kilograms divided by square coulomb per meter. And therefore, in natural units, our inertia, we don't say mass now, we say inertia in Burls, is square charge, square coulombs per meter. Okay, and this works. And now this is the fundamental model of matter. Because why? There's nothing else. Here is matter, instituted by its inertia, or what they used to call mass. And it's nothing more than square charge per meter. There's nothing else here. There's nothing else we could blame the existence of matter on. And it turns out that if you have two charges separated by a distance, that turns out to be the most fundamental component of matter. And also what they call antimatter. It's really not antimatter, but that's a small topic for later. So, oh, and it's the blue. Again, the blue are the legacy units. And again, we're getting rid of the legacy units for natural units, where we can get rid of all these arbitrary constants of relation and just talk in terms. Because here, if you just say, well, mass is kilograms, that doesn't tell you anything. Where if you say mass is 2 charges separated by distance, now you have a system. Okay? So, but don't be confused with a system of natural units. I just found this out. These physicists have come up with so many systems of natural units. I didn't even know. I just started using this term. I just found this out. And this is really shows the clown logic of physicists, because already we have length in meters, we have time in seconds, we have mass in kilograms. We already have arbitrary quantities that we measure physical things with. And here they've done it, they've reformed all of these things in terms of combinations of all these obscure constants. So this is when now we end up with these, it's still meters, kilograms, and seconds, it's just the fundamental unit has changed. And this is ridiculous because I heard Planck say, oh yeah, we're going to do this so if ever there's a space alien race, we could communicate with them because we're using fundamentally the same units. No, you're not. It's still in terms of meters, kilograms, seconds. All they've done is taken and convoluted it to another degree, which is completely unnecessary. In ethereal mechanics, we're getting rid of these constants. Or at the very least, taking them out of the realm of arbitrary and turning them into very readable, very discerning constants that tell us exactly what's going on underneath. Just like you saw with our unpacking of the gravity constant in the electrogravity series of videos. So in ethereal mechanics, the natural units are just based on the fundamental arbitrary measured quantities, coulomb, second. So there's nothing but coulombs, seconds, and meter. Everything is reducible to coulombs, seconds, and meters. And if ever you want to convert a natural units into the legacy units, you multiply by km, which is mu over 4 pi, and that turns them into the legacy units. So when you see these terms in legacy units, they're in their legacy quantities. Like force is kilograms meters per second squared, where the new Newton is just square amperes. And the joule here is square ampere meters. Inertia is square coulombs per meter. And the magnetization thing is just amp meter, which is like in the classical electromagnetism, is amp pure meter. So, that's just my check to make sure I didn't make a mistake. So what is the mass of a binary system? Well, again, you take two charges separated by a distance. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use because these particles spin about each other over a central point, we're going to use the orbital radius. The orbital radius is 2 times the orbital radius is the distance between the particles. Okay, and then if somebody pushes up on this system and the right side accelerates, according to new induction, it's going to induce a force in the opposite direction on the opposite charge. And likewise, because we're going to accelerate this whole system as a whole, we also have to do the same calculation on the other side. Okay, so the total force reacting against our finger trying to push up on this system is the sum of these two forces here. Okay, and that works out to the effective mass, or inertia, really is the appropriate term, is square coulombs divided by the orbital radius. Now, we can solve for the orbital radius, so we can take the coulombs, the Pretonic charge that's here, divided by the mass, and then we'll be able to get out the orbital radius of these systems. Okay, and let's do it for the electrons. Now, I say the electrons because the electron is one of a family of 3. And I call the entire set the electrons. Okay, the first one is the electron itself, and it has an orbital radius of 7 times 10 to the minus 16 meters. Now, this is awfully big. Okay, we're going to discuss that in a moment, but it's still 4 times smaller than the orbital radius computed using quantum mechanics and what they call the classical electron radius. So at least the ethereal mechanics is going in the right direction, more towards small. But this is way too big, but we're going to explain there's a way to make sense of this. This is more of an effective radius, and we'll explain that more at the end. Okay, then you have the muon, which is a little bit smaller. And then you have the tau. These are all the same system. The same system. It's just the systems get smaller as their mass gets heavier. Oh, well, sure, I should say as their inertia increases, as they get heavier is a better way to say it. Okay, but these are the same system. Just like an electron can exist at a different energy state while it's part of a hydrogen atom, there's no reason why an electron can't exist at a higher energy state unto itself. So the muon and the tau are just higher energy states of an electron. Okay, that's all it is. It's the same system. It's the same particle because the inertia is mutable. The mass, what they called the mass, what they called an intrinsic property, is mutable. Okay, they don't know that. Ethereal mechanics is the only one that predicts that. They think these are three separate particles because they think the masses are different, and because the masses are different, they have to be different systems. They're not. It's the same system, just at a higher energy state. This is a higher energy state, and because it's a higher energy state, these pretons orbit at a much tighter radius. Okay, again, don't forget to talk about the distances. I just did that. We're going to talk about why these distances look a lot larger than what scientists believe the size of an electron is. We're going to explain that more toward the end. But right now, look upon these as effective distances. So within the orbital radius of the electron, 207, you can fit 207 muons within the orbital radius of the electron. 207. Now remember this ratio. The orbital radius of the electron divided by the orbital radius of the muon is 206.77. 206.77. Now, if I want to put tau particles in there, well, 17 tau particles can fit within the orbital radius of one muon. So these tau particles are exceptionally small. Okay, and in ethereal mechanics, the smaller you are, the more energy you have. And the more inertia, what scientists call mass, you have. Now, if you look at a page from Quantum magazine, the quantum grease monkeys say, well, the tau must be bigger because it has more mass. And you see, and you'll see that in the literature. They're called the tau, the large electron. It's not. It's smaller. They got it backwards. Okay? So again, quantum mechanics, heavier particles are larger. In ethereal mechanics, heavier particles are smaller. And the reason why I'm doing this thing with the arrows is because I get all the right answers. People say, oh, because you're isomorphic with quantum mechanics, you just reinvented quantum mechanics. I need to show you that I'm getting the right answers going a completely opposite direction of quantum mechanics. This is not quantum mechanics reinvented, is what a lot of people are trying to say now, which is kind of good. Because as Arthur C. Clarke said, invention goes in three stages. One, they say, oh, you're full of shit, you don't know what you're doing. Number two, you're like, maybe. And then the final thing, they're trying to say, oh, yeah, we knew it all the time. Where they basically just try to hijack your idea because they realize their ideas are outdated. So what is the clue that I can use to show you, to corroborate for you, that the tau particle is actually smaller than the electron? There's got to be a way to corroborate that, and there is. It's called magnetic moments. So let's look at magnetic moments for a bit. So if we just use the simple ethereal mechanic model of magnetic moment, the magnetic moment is just the current times the area. And so if you have two charges spinning in a circle of radius of orbit RO, well, the current in the loop is total charge divided by the period. The period is the circumference, which is 2 pi RO, divided by the velocity that they're orbiting at. Okay, so we put that together to get the I, and then the area of the loop is pi RO squared. We put that together, and here, lo and behold, we see that the magnetic moment, because the total charge of all these systems are the same, the magnetic moment is proportional to the diameter, the size of the particle. So therefore, if the muon is larger than the electron, then it should have a larger magnetic moment. If I am correct that the muon is smaller than the electron, then its magnetic moment must be smaller. So survey says, so the magnetic moment of the muon is 207 times smaller than the magnetic moment of the electron. Now what I showed you here, the magnetic moment is proportional to the radius. Now remember that number before, 206.77? Well, let's take the ratio of the muon magnetic moment to the electron magnetic, or the other way around. So the electron magnetic moment is 206.77 times larger than the magnetic moment of the muon. Remember I said they're proportional to size. Well, here's your radius. There it is, hook, line, and sinker. How about them apples? So the muon is a smaller particle. It can only be a smaller particle because its magnetic moment is smaller. These physicists have this stuff backwards, but that's part of human nature. We always seem to get stuff backwards before we get it right. You know, one day we believe that the sun goes around the earth. The next day we realize the earth goes around the sun. It's happened. There's a lot. I've got a whole list of things where we got things backwards before we get them right. This is just normal for human evolution. And those are the ratios to more decimal places. You can see they don't line up perfectly because there's a little anomaly in there. Yes, ethereal mechanics and has an anomaly just like quantum mechanics, but I'm going to show you that the ethereal mechanics anomaly is smaller than the quantum mechanics anomaly. So if we were just trying to infer the tau particle just by taking a simple ratios, well, this would be the magnetic moment of the tau particle. Oh, yeah, that's right. They don't have the measurement for the magnetic moment of the tau particle yet. All right, so we're going to come back to actually compute the magnetic moments. The only thing we did right now is just use to show you that the magnetic moment is proportional to the size of the particle. We didn't actually compute it. We're going to go and actually compute it in a few moments. We just need to finish other parts of the ethereal mechanics standard or the Pretonic standard model. Okay, so there's the UPS particles, and again, just like the electron, the up quark comes in 3 energy states. The charm is a higher energy state of the up. The top is an even higher energy state of the up. Okay, and these are all their radii. Again, they look big, but again, we're going to discuss that later. And this is where you can do this because this equation is for binary particles. This is only for binary particles. And so here is the other set of particles that we put together. You can see the pretons. These are positive pretons make up the ups, negative pretons make up the electrons, and the downs are all made up by a combination of these two. These are more complicated than we're going to get into right now, but the important thing here is these are all debris. These are not stable particles. I know physicists think that the proton's made of 2 ups and 1 down, but yeah, they're made of that number of pretons, sure, but they're not these configurations. Okay, these are debris. In other words, when you smash things together like choo-choo trains or whatnot, you're going to get a lot of debris. And in that debris, you're going to get a lot of parts you just can't put into another, use as a spare part in another train, because that debris is going to be damaged beyond use. And you should expect the same thing to happen when you smash perfectly good protons and neutrons together. You're going to get useless debris. Now, the only thing that gets conserved in all of ethereal mechanics are the pretons. Okay, inertia, energy are all states that can get recycled, but the only thing that's conserved are the pretons. Okay, we also have preliminary neutrino set, which is actually more neutrinos than this. This is the ones I have here. I'm going to show you another form of neutrino. These neutrinos, they have no charge. I know it looks like you got a plus 1/3 and a minus 1/2. I'm sorry, yeah, 1/3 and a minus 1/2. But these are Pretonic charge. They are not Coulomb charges. These systems do not spin, and because they do not spin, they do not emit Coulomb charges. If you want to see more information on that, you've got to go back to the ethereal mechanics electrogravity to see how the Coulomb charge is synthesized in the standard model of matter. Okay, but the interesting thing about these is they do have a very slight 1/6 Preton charge, and these come in another flavor that have a minus 1/6 Preton charge. We'll show you those in a moment. But the interesting thing about these is these, because they have a negative inertia property, not positive inertia, negative inertia, these systems will fly away at the speed of light. The speed of light is the speed they saturate at. And they could be misidentified as a high energy proton with no mass. Oh, and because they look like they have no mass, they actually have antimass. But because they're traveling at the speed of light, whatever anti-effect cancels, and it looks like they have no mass. They actually look like it could be a photon. And that's one thing that they could be misidentified as. Okay, so the other note, this is an observation, hasn't been corroborated yet, but it looks like that negative pretons are stable in systems of multiples of 2, where positive pretons are stable in systems of multiples of 3. So here you have the electron and the positron. Now let me show you the electron-positron canceling. This is like all over the internet, and everybody has a different Feynman diagram or a different diagram of how these things interact with each other when they decay. So here you got your electron, it's spinning under its own power, just minding its own business, and then somebody shoots a positron and it hits it right in the center. So now what's going to happen is, because these are spinning counterclockwise, but the interesting thing is their acceleration is both inward. This acceleration net of these two is inward as well as this one. And so these massive accelerations are going to cause these systems to fly apart in opposite directions. So let me get rid of the circles and put those guys back. And this is kind of my really bad PowerPoint animation of how these systems are going to fly apart. Okay, great. That's just what I could do with PowerPoint. They're not going to pass through each other. They're going to pass slightly off to each side to each other. But I don't have enough bandwidth in PowerPoint to do that. Forget the little arrow down there. It's just hang over. So what happened, the item that went off on the right ends up being a neutrino with a -1,6 charge. And the system that flew off to the left would be considered like an anti-neutrino. I don't know, but we'll call one anti, the other one anti. And it has a positive charge of +1. Now again, that's not Coulomb charge, that's Pretonic charge. It's not going. You're not going to see a Coulomb field from this, but there's going to be a slight magnetic interaction. But because the system is traveling so fast, you may not see that slight magnetic interaction. And when this thing passes through a magnetic field, it's just going to cause the system to diverge. It's not going to cause it to end or to arc. It's just going to cause the components to diverge. So it may not see any arcing of this system due to magnetic effects. So now let's look and see what. This is busy, but here we go. We got two systems. You got an electron and a positron that collide, and you get two things that look like photons passing off 180 degrees in opposite directions, and occasionally you also get a neutrino. Interesting. So we get the same effect. It's just they're misidentifying these things as photons when they're most not, because these are not antimatter. They are just oppositely charged systems. Okay, and the things that fly apart are not photons. They're actually Pretonic systems that look remarkably, could be misidentified as photons rather. So these are the higher order systems. We're not going to get into all of these right now. We're going to show you a little thing about the proton, but what it is and I don't like this notation for the protium. This is hydrogen with one electron and no neutrons. I don't like this terminology. I may make these guys outside of this, so don't take these. Oh, by the way, these little asterisks are just places for other parameters that I'm going to put in the future. These, like I said, this notation, this system of describing these is all preliminary. But let's see how the proton decays according to ethereal mechanics. Oops, that wasn't supposed to be there yet. Okay, so you have the proton, and it's a hex. It's got 6 positive pretons and 2 negative pretons. This negative electron-like system is on the inside. It's stuck inside of it. And according to ethereal mechanics, this can happen. So when this thing breaks down under the normal conditions we see every day, well, when they do it, of course, you have enough pretons to make 2 ups and 1 down quark. Okay, but that's not the ending of the story here, because the down quark, if you hit this thing with enough energy, the down quark can break down into a small electron derivative and another up quark. So you can get almost 4 quarks out of this thing. But even worse, there's another possibility that instead of breaking it down into other quarks, the down can break down into neutrinos. Okay, so it's possible with all the combinations for them to see more than 4 different weird particles coming out of this. And people are now saying, well, you have to go look at the Feynman diagrams. They explain all the ways that the proton can break down, and you really need to look those up, so you know, because this stuff looks like fantasy land to me. Well, yeah, okay, but look what's coming out. Is a proton a pentaquark? See, these people have no clue what they're doing. I'm not talking about this guy here himself. I'm talking about the quantum grease monkeys that make this stuff up as they go along. Okay, quantum mechanics is over 100 years old, and they still do not have a stable model of what these particles are and what they do, or what's inside them. And what I just showed you in ethereal mechanics is there's other possibilities of the way these particles could break down, and those could be misidentified many different ways. Okay, so that's showing you 100 years we've gotten pretty much nowhere, and they still don't have the ability to explain gravity. They can't explain they can't unify gravity with electromagnetism, where the ethereal mechanics does. Okay, now let's get back to computing the magnetic moment. Remember what we derived from our binary system. This is our magnetic moment of our binary system. Okay, so but what we're going to do before we get into this is we're going to go look at what the quantum grease monkeys say. And this is a page from Wikipedia. This is electron magnetic moment. And this is just, I look at this page and I just weep. How silly. So they got all this stuff. They got the spin and the G factor, and then they got the GS, which is the what do you call it? That's what is that? The Dirac spin equation or something like that. So they got all this extra nonsense. What would be considered a very standard model for magnetic moment. Now, what they did here is they split all these out down here. Now look how silly this is. You've got the Planck constant, the reduced Planck constant, in 3 different places here. And then you got the Dirac spin factor canceling out the 2 in the H factor. So all of this stuff that they added on the left and on the right are completely useless. As a matter of fact, it's so ridiculous that you don't need all this extra stuff that even the person that reviewed this said, this is dubious. Let's discuss this. This shows you how useless all this stuff is. They just keep throwing crap on top of crap that's completely unnecessary. And I'm going to show you. We're going to do the derivation of the ethereal mechanics. I'm going to show you if I leave off one component, I can get exactly the same magnetic moment that they get without all the fuss and fuss. So, oh yeah, and then also here, the factor of the 2 implies the electron appears twice as efficient as producing a magnetic moment as a corresponding classical definition. That's what it says under there. So they're not consistent with the classical definition, where ethereal mechanics is consistent with classical mechanics. In fact, our derivation of the magnetic moment is a completely classical exercise. So simple, even a physicist can do it. So let's return to the derivation. Again, this is what we derived before from our binary system. This is a magnetic moment of a binary system. So now what we need to do is come up with the orbital velocity and the orbital radius. Well, we already know how to get the orbital radius. Okay, but how do we get the orbital velocity? Well, are you ready to go down the Bro-Lifen rabbit hole? Well, my Patreon members know what that means. But basically, this is how we came about determining what the Planck constant really means, how to unpack it, and what the finite structure constant really means and how to unpack it. So let's unpack the Planck constant first. First, I'm going to show you what physicists think it is. And this is a thing, again, from Wikipedia. It says the Planck constant, there it is. And this, if you go in here, it's completely... it is nothing more than an arbitrary constant of relation that they've tried to interpret to mean different things. Like, for example, Uncle Albert says that because of black body radiation, the energy of light is not transferred continuously as in classical wave. That is wrong, but we'll get to that later. But only in small packets or quanta. And the size of these packages can be defined by this. Now, it blows my mind. This does not define quanta. This is a continuous function. I don't know where he says that this is quantum in nature. As each frequency goes up, the energy in the wave goes up linearly. This is not quanta. If this were quantized, then there would be discrete frequencies, only discrete frequencies at which could re-radiate. Okay, that's not what quantum mechanics says. Quantum mechanics says that discrete levels of energy radiate. And here's where I have the biggest problem with all of this nonsense. All of the stuff we use to create black body radiation is made out of corpuscular matter. And corpuscular matter is quantized in nature. In other words, it's only going to emit energy in certain energy levels because it's corpuscular. And all of our instruments that measure light are going to only measure in corpuscular units because it's made of corpuscular matter. So we're inappropriately attributing to light the corpuscular nature of our instruments. Okay, if photons are corpuscular, there is no way we can know. It's like putting on rose-colored glasses and trying to explain to somebody what the color white is, because everything's going to look rosy. Okay, that's our problem here. Is these people have gone off on all of this stuff, and because it gets good answers, they think they got real physics, but none of it makes any sense. Okay, I'm going to show you what ethereal mechanics says Planck's equation means. So in ethereal mechanics, H is your particle inertia times the circumference, not of your particle, times the velocity of circulation. And this is what it means. And this is what it means in the units. It's square coulombs times velocity. Okay, but now if you want to put it into legacy units, you got to multiply this by km. When you multiply this by km, you get the legacy and the legacy units over here. Okay, for binary systems only, we can replace B with the binary definition of inertia, and we're going to use this quite effectively. So what does this all mean? Well, you got to understand what a second order system of pretons does. So look at my little friend here. Hold on. And what we have here is pretons that are spinning around. When pretons are in their rest state, they're spinning randomly in all directions, and that's how matter is in its normal state. It's just random spinning, but it completes a complete sphere. Okay, once you expose this system to a magnetic field, it's going to rotate consistent with that field. It's going to rotate in a plane. And when this starts rotating in a plane, it's going to spin up the medium. It's going to start accelerating the medium in its area. And the medium is going to turn into what we're going to call a spin vortex. Oh, I just got a little crash. That's okay. I don't need that anymore. Go away. Okay, so what this means, what the Planck constant means, if you take the Planck constant and divide it by the inertia of your system, then what it says is that the rotation of the medium about your particle due to your system spinning it up. Okay, so you take any circumference through the medium, and where that circumference is, the velocity times the circumference is going to be a constant all the way out. And that's what it means. So you can use this to determine at the position where your system is rotating what the spin velocity of the medium is. Okay, now if we want to, these are just different ways to show this system here. Now granted, these are the Planck constant shown in natural units, and this is the reduced Planck constant shown in natural units. The reduced Planck constant is just h divided by 2 pi. But at least you know now where the 2 pi comes from that they use for the reduced Planck constant. It comes from the circulation path of your vortex that is being spun up by your system of matter. And that's why this h is only it's not for light. Now granted, because you're spinning up the medium, and the medium is what transfers light from one port to the other, it is going to have a relationship to how light is cast off from a system that is changing. So it's useful there. Okay, but the amount of the energy in the packet is not a limitation of light, it's a limitation of matter. There's another way I can explain that, but I forgot to make a slide on it, but that's okay. So what we want to do, though, is we want to know what the velocity of rotation of the medium is at the radial orbit of the system. Oh, I'm sorry. So someone might say, well, oh, that's crazy. That's crazy. How can you possibly make that claim of this thing where, oh, gee, the circumference and the velocity are constant at any given radius from the spinning system? That sounds too hokey. That sounds too insane. Oh, well, look at Ampere's circuital law. It does the same thing. Okay, so what is the velocity of the medium at the orbital radius? Well, all we have to do then is go through all this stuff, and we're going to replace B with the inertia of a binary system. And then we're going to plug all this stuff together, and down here, and blah, blah, all over the place, and we're going to end up with this. So that's charge down here. You can't see it because of my stupid bar. But this is Pretonic charge squared into the reduced Planck constant. That is the velocity of circulation. That's what it reduces to. It's exquisitely simple. Okay, but here's the important part to remember. Because that's the velocity of the medium. Pretons still have to feed. So pretons have to move at the speed of light through that. So they have to move speed of light faster than the velocity of circulation of the medium. So the orbital velocity of the pretons is your circulation velocity plus c. And that works out to this over here. All I've done here now is that the pretons are half the Coulomb charge, and I've substituted that into here, and well, that into there, over there. Okay, whatever. That's what you get. Okay, now that we have the orbital velocity and we have the orbital radius, we can plug those into our derivation for the magnetic moment, and that all reduces to this here. Now, I could multiply this through and reduce this, but I don't want to, because this thing in the bracket here, that's our velocity term. This is important to us. We want to look at to see what the velocity of the pretons are when they're actually moving through the medium. It'll blow your mind. Okay, but for those people that don't like to work in natural units, what we're going to do is we're going to replace the inertia of the electron, and we're doing this for the electron, by the mass of the electron divided by km. And we're going to replace the Planck constant, whatever. We're going to substitute this into there. Okay, so when we plug everything together and reduce, this is the equation that you get. And when you plug in all the values, this is the magnetic moment of the electron computed using ethereal mechanics. Now what you should notice here is that ethereal mechanics gets a value that's slightly larger than the measured value. It's slightly larger by 0.07%. Okay, that's very important. So now what I can do now is if we just take this little component here, okay, this is the compensation for the Preton going faster than the medium, this part here. But if I take this part here, watch what I get when I substitute the values in for this, just that part there. Okay, I get this value. This turns out to be exactly the same value that quantum mechanics computes with all this other garbage that, like I showed you in that equation before, completely cancels out, is completely unnecessary. And they say, oh, it doesn't follow the classical definition. Well, this is pretty much a classical definition. Okay? And this is the answer they get. Okay? Again, this is assuming that the pretons only move at the rotational velocity of the medium, which that can't be the case because pretons need to feed. And so what happens is, though, so we're calling this is the partial because it's not the complete story, but it is the quantum mechanics answer. Okay? And because the problem here is that this system is short. Okay? If I turn it upside down, it turns out it's 1.115 or 0.116% short. Okay, we're missing magnetic moment here. We don't have enough magnetic moment. Okay, and that's a problem because when they add their anomaly back in, and this is exactly their anomaly here, when they add their anomaly back in, when they correct with their anomaly, they're basically saying we've got to get energy from somewhere. Okay, they're missing energy in their calculation. That's the problem. And I'm going to show you that this isn't a problem for ethereal mechanics because we have too much magnetic moment. So we go through the comparison. Okay, this is ethereal mechanics. Ethereal mechanics is over by 0.06%, and the quantum mechanics comes out is short by 0.116%. Okay, now how ethereal mechanics explains the problem. It's a very simple, very rational, logical reason. It's not this exchanging of Feynman diagram components and all this crap, which to my opinion is just garbage. Here's how it goes. Because the second order system of Proton is generating a coherent magnetic field and it's spinning up the medium, this is a task that requires more power. And because Protons feed proportional to acceleration, okay, and increased acceleration corresponds to a tighter orbital radius, okay, and that means what the system is going to do, it's going to pull in its radius to consume ether at a higher rate. And like I showed you, the magnetic moment is proportional to the radius, and therefore the magnetic moment is going to become reduced. Okay, if this is correct, it means the electron will be slightly heavier when it's magnetized. That's absolutely true. That follows. If you're doing something that requires more energy, it's going to look like it has more mass. Because when you start feeding at a tighter radius, you're going to have more inertia. It's going to feel like the particle is heavier. Okay. How do they explain that with quantum mechanics? I don't know. They have to, in order to produce more magnetic moment, okay, you get where I'm saying? You got to pull energy from somewhere. You got to spin faster, or you got to pull your radius out, which means your mass drive. They're ridiculous. It's just, all I see is quantum mechanics. All quantum mechanics is, in my opinion, is just a bunch of guys that sit around and reverse engineer the observations made in their accelerators to try to come up with a coherent model so they can keep their job. But everybody has got, I'm sorry, I'll stop complaining. So these are the ethereal mechanics magnetic moments of the binary systems, and with the anomalies baked in. Now I have a method of determining anomalies. It's still kind of a little preliminary, but I think it's okay right now. But until I get a way to corroborate it, it's preliminary. I'm not going to release it yet until I can corroborate it. But these are all the magnetic moments of the binary particles as per ethereal mechanics. Okay, now let's talk about the speed of negative pretons. The negative pretons which are in the electron. Now remember, this is the magnetic moment equation we showed before. This is our speed equation. So let's pull this out. That's our velocity, our orbital velocity of our pretons. Okay, now what I'm going to do for those people that are not familiar with legacy natural units, I'm going to replace all of the legacy units so we can compute stuff here. Okay, and it says that the velocity of the pretons in the electron are 550 times the speed of light. So we already have now, we're breaking the light barrier. Every particle of matter is breaking the light barrier hundreds fold. Now what's interesting is that this thing here correlates exactly to 4 divided by the fine structure constant. So this means the fine structure constant is not a unitless constant. It is a velocity ratio. Now, these physicists get my gourd when they say, oh, it's a unitless constant. And that's not true. There's no such thing in physics as a unitless constant. In mathematics there are, but not in physics. Okay? Because like if I have an amplifier, a voltage amplifier, where voltage out is equal to 5 times the voltage in, well, that can only amplify voltage, even though the amplifier is unitless. I can't put a gold coin in and get 5 gold coins out. If I had a truly unitless amplifier, I could put 5 gold coin in and get 5 gold coins out. That's what you mean when you say it's unitless. Okay, no, this is a velocity ratio, period. It's not unitless. Okay, and so the fine structure constant can be reduced down to these natural units here. You can see if you go on Wikipedia and you get the way the quantum grease monkeys do it, you get all this unnecessary garbage in there. Totally unnecessary garbage. They just love to convolute stuff. I don't know what their deal is. When you get rid of all this nasty blue gunk and things reduce down to nice simple equations. Okay, and again, this is for binary systems only. Now, the important part to remember from this is that fine structure constant that we computed before was only for the electron. If I were to use the same thing to derive the fine structure constant of the up quark, it would be a value that's 2.25 times smaller. Therefore, if I compute the velocity of the up speed, again, we just punch into the velocity equation, and that's what we get. The up quarks, the velocity of the up quarks is 1,200 times the speed of light. And you can see how if we use the legacy fine structure constant, the velocity of the up quark is 9 over the fine structure, where it's only 4 over its own fine structure constant. And it's interesting how these are all even numbers of all this. Very interesting. That shows the quanta level. Now again, I'm going to say to people, I'm not against the idea that nature and physics are quantified, that there's packets of limited size energy when we're dealing with matter. But that doesn't mean quantum mechanics is a viable science. Well, that's not true. To me, everything after where the physicists buried Schrodinger's cat in the pet cemetery to get something that's both alive and dead at the same time, everything after that is gibberish. I have no problem with the stuff that came before that. It's just statistical mechanics. I think they came up with this whole alive and dead at the same time. It's because they need to keep their jobs and they realize this stuff was going nowhere fast. And so they come up with all this fantasy world to keep the average rubes enchanted with all of their gibberish. Okay, so next we're going to justify the overly large distances. I'm going to show you it actually kind of makes sense when you look at it from a different perspective. And then we're going to give a synopsis of everything we just talked about, and then we're going to discuss the next steps in ethereal mechanics. However, first, I got to do some begging and pleading. Okay, so we have these large distances that are between the particles in a Proton that would be much, much larger than what physicists could accept to be the sizes of these systems. But the interesting thing you have to remember is that we are spinning up the medium. And sorry for my poor hand drawing. I didn't have time to make a nice little simulation. Okay, and because we're spinning up the medium, the actual path that the force takes from particle A to particle B may be twisted around multiple times before it gets there. And this is beautiful. This may explain why things are quantized. Now, of course, there's going to be a string theory guy there. Oh, you have reinvented string theory. No, yeah, please stop. Okay, this is not string theory. It looks like it. Okay, but this may explain why things are quantized. Because when you have a force that leaves one particle, it has to arrive at the correct phase and amplitude at the other particle. And there may be only limited states of spin and distance where, and the way that the medium is being spun up, where these systems can all align to be stable. And so that may explain why there's certain, all of those things that we do that we see in the early parts of quantum mechanics, where there's, the certain number of wavelengths fit in there and all this other stuff. I forgot the name of that. So this would be a way to explain that, okay, for once and for all. I'm sure I'm going to get a thank you from all the quantum grease monkeys because I might have just saved quantum mechanics here. Sorry. So what's our summary here? Well, the Pretonic system for the standard model was introduced, which shows you the inner sides of those particles. And it shows you that mass is not an intrinsic property. It's actually a synthesized. And we don't really call it mass anymore. We call it inertia, or the heaviness of a particle. It also showed that spin is real. It's not this intrinsic function that makes no sense according to the quantum spin that they have out there. Show you how magnetic moments are computed and show that we get a much more closer magnetic moment with a smaller anomaly than quantum mechanics does, because we're accounting for how the system actually works inside. Okay, we've unpacked the Planck constant, and we showed you more detail about the fine structure constant than anybody has ever seen before. It's much, much more than just this arbitrary constant. And that faster than light travel is real. So what's happening next in ethereal mechanics? Well, part 2 or 3 of the standard model is going to be at least a year off. There's a lot more work to do. I got a lot of other things I got to do first. I have to write the new electromagnetism version 5 paper and do the video series. I got till the end of the year to get all that done. And then January 23rd, January of 2023, I can start the cosmology. That's going to be a long time. In the meantime, we're going to search for the second feeder. Okay, my Patreon folks already know what I'm talking about. If you watch the Electrogravity series of papers, I mentioned that there is something else. In order to get everything to balance out, there's a second set of forces that require feeding. I counted for the feeding, but I don't know what the forces are. These are probably very short distance forces, like what they would call the strong or the weak force. But I'm not going by what they have. This has got to be something else. And it might only have to be inferred because there's nothing else I can measure at the desktop level, at least nothing within the realm of what my instruments can see. I'll say it to you that way. So we got to search. There is a second set of forces out there that do feed on the ether. And this would be part of what we need for the standard model because it would explain why, part of the reasons why these systems are stable. Okay, thank you very much. Please help if you can. Ooh, I spelled that wrong. Only one E there. Thank you.